Do you believe in ghosts?
I believe that ghosts are very important and that experiences with ghosts are very meaningful to people, and everybody has a different level of experience with ghosts.
So if I'm reading between the lines there, that sounds almost like a no.
I'm a scholar. Even if I were putting myself in the position of deciding, I wouldn't really be equipped. It's hard to know for sure. That's why it's such an interesting subject.
All right, guys, today on the podcast, I got Dr. Elizabeth Tucker, and you go by Libby. So we're going to call you Libby instead of that big, long title. But what exactly are you a doctor in?
I have a doctorate in folklore from Indiana University.
What a coincidence. That's exactly what I was hoping to talk about today. I don't know how that happened, but I'm glad you're here. So you're joining us from New York, right?
Yes, from Vestal, New York. I teach at Binghamton University. I'm an English professor there.
Really? And you know, I know that you have some specialized classes and stuff. Before we started recording here, you were telling me that just today you did a Gothic, American Gothic class or something?
And this morning I taught a class called American Gothic Horror. And then this afternoon I just came from my Folklore of the Supernatural class. And in Folklore of the Supernatural class, I give them a couple of essay assignments, but then I divide them into groups and ask them to investigate a place in this area that's supposed to be haunted.
Oh, that sounds fun. How does that go?
Well, they have certain places around here that are famous for having some sort of ghostly presences, such as the Robertson Mansion and the Phelps Mansion in downtown Binghamton that were owned by turn of the century industrial magnates. And they're supposed to be haunted by the men who built them. And so the students go and they collect stories about the places and they take pictures and they make videos and they see what they can find.
Do they ever actually find ghosts?
Sometimes they've found some strange things.
Well, I guess the other question is, do you believe in ghosts?
I believe that ghosts are very important and that experiences with ghosts are very meaningful to people, and everybody has a different level of experience with ghosts.
So if I'm reading between the lines there, that sounds almost like a no. But the influence they have.
It's not a no. I'm a scholar. It's not really my business to and even if I were putting myself in the position of deciding, I wouldn't really be equipped. It's hard to know for sure. That's why it's such an interesting subject.
Right. No, I respect that answer.
It's very difficult to know what's going on sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how did you end up getting wrapped up into this subject matter that is kind of, consumed, at least your academic life? What started this journey for you?
Well, thank you for asking that question. After I went to college, I spent a year in Germany on a Fulbright, and then I went into the Peace Corps in West Africa for 2 years. And I learned so much there about the beliefs and the practices, the songs, the dances, the stories that people told there. I really wanted to learn more. And so I went to Folklore graduate school at Indiana University. And I almost went to Africa to get a PhD, but then I decided to work with American children instead. And they told such wonderful ghost stories that led me in this direction.
It's funny you mentioned that. I had a buddy, he was we went to high school together, and he joined the Peace Corps, and he ended up in, I forget the name of the country, but it was West Africa. I want to say Ivory
Oh,
Coast,
where I was.
Oh, really?
Ivory Coast.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah. That's
what year? Certainly after I was there.
Oh, he would have been there. I think this would have been like 98, 99, 2000, somewhere in there.
I was there in 72, 74, a long time ago.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, he came back, and we kind of, he came back a lot skinnier than he left. And we kind of picked on him about that, but I don't know why now, considering I'm 45 and can't lose weight. I kind of like, well, maybe I should go to West Africa myself.
Oh, but, don't do that, because they have a lot of things you can get that make you thinner, but really sick. A lot of the guys in my group of Peace Corps volunteers got very sick and lost weight. The women didn't have that happen as often for some reason. They just broke bones.
Oh, calcium deficiencies or something. Yeah, I remember but he came back with a lot of really interesting stories, and it wasn't, folklore necessarily, but he knows that I've always been interested in ghosts and, cryptozoology, all the weird things out there. And he came back with a lot of tales of folklore in that area. And I'd be lying if I told you that I remember all of them growing up, but I do remember thinking, well, that's pretty interesting. And it kind of actually shares a lot of similarities with folklore and superstitions that we have here in America as well.
Absolutely. You want to hear one of my stories from my Peace Corps years?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. One of my best friends, a guy in the group, said that he had gotten to know a lightning doctor who was able to call lightning out of the sky. And he went to visit this lightning doctor one day, and the lightning doctor said, "See that big boulder over there?" And he said, "Yes, I do." And the guy pulled a big bolt of lightning right out of the sky and shattered it.
Do you believe that?
I believe that it happened to my friend because he had no reason to lie.
No, I get it. I mean, some of that stuff, it does sound crazy, and it does make you question, what people are capable of. If that really happened, then, it only takes one person to prove that people can do it, right? I guess.
Oh, yeah.
That's a skill I'd like to learn. I have an enemy every now and then. I'm like, man, I would like to strike them down with lightning, maybe.
Huh. I've never heard of anybody doing that in this country, though there are stories in Appalachia about big balls of fire or lightning bolts that go after people. Sometimes people think that they're spirits of the dead who are coming out of the cemetery and chasing enemies that their families had years ago.
Right. Kind of like a Hatfield McCoy kind of thing.
Yes, pretty much along those lines.
Well, Appalachia, it has a lot of folklore. I kind of grew up in Appalachia, that part of Pennsylvania. And I remember growing up, there were it was always like the people off in their cabins in the woods. It was, at the time we were kids, so we just always thought they were like the crazy woods people. They were the ones who'd go to their house and they would have all kind of, I don't want to call them artifacts or anything, but maybe that's the right word for them. Just like these weird sculptures, weird figures, and you ask them about them, and they had some fantastical story about every one of them. This one's for protecting, the house. This one is to help, the crops grow. This one is, to keep spirits actually one was nearby. They wanted to keep their family nearby. So they had, it almost looked like a totem pole. And on the top, they put like flowers or something on it. And that was their way of making sure that their loved ones stayed near them after death. So, Appalachia's full of folk stories and stuff.
No, absolutely. And many of those traditions have come straight over from 16th, 17th century England. It was customary to protect the house with oak and ash and thorn leaves from witches, or to put certain charms on the threshold to keep anything bad from happening to your family.
Yeah, actually, you said oak and ash. So there's this band I've been listening to. They're called the Longest Johns. I don't know if you ever heard of them. They do
No, I'm sorry. No.
They do sea shanty music, and one of their songs is called Oak and Ash. And I was always wondering, maybe there's a connection there.
I know that song, yes. And I just went to a sea shanty festival in Cornwall, in Falmouth last summer. It was great.
I actually, my wife makes fun of me all the time, but I think I'm getting her hooked on it. I love sea shanty music, but they're called the Longest Johns. If you like that kind of music, check them out. They're really good.
Thank you. I will check that out. I'll look on YouTube. So,
the idea of, folklore and the passing of these stories down from generation to generation, I am assuming that is a human, like we've been doing it probably since, the caveman days or something, right? The telling of stories. But, in your opinion, why do you think these stories even matter? Like, why is it so important that we continue to pass these down? And then I guess, how do they still shape society? We talked very briefly before we started recording about how, everything's so modern and stuff today, but you pushed back on that when I said, I think that it's dying a little bit. So why do you think they're so important, and how do you think that they're changing?
That's a great question to ask. I think it's always been important for people to tell stories about their lives and to tell stories about things that reflect their hopes and their dreams and their fears. If we look at the old traditional stories, for example, like Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, some of the ones that you can trace pretty far back into medieval Europe, you find that these stories matter greatly to people, and they reflect what people hope for, and they have sometimes very complex characterizations of good and evil in the world. And for many years, people told these stories in the evening to each other, and it was for all ages, not just for children, but for adults and anybody who was there. And then it seemed that there wasn't quite so much of that kind of storytelling going on. But instead, this kind of story became the province of literature and of film and television. And so there are so many versions, for example, of Snow White, Cinderella, and other beloved tales. And I have two little granddaughters, age 3 and 4. They know the stories of Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty. They have the dolls, they have the outfits. They know these stories really well, and they've just learned them in a different medium than it used to be, through word of mouth. So in many cases, these stories are still here. They've just shifted mediums and they're told in a different way.
So do you think this Frozen movie, you're talking about Disney, is that going to become the next folklore story 100 years from now? Or
Well, that's a great question. And I can't really say. I think that Frozen it follows the familiar folktale pattern of contrasting girls in a story, contrasting fates. And it certainly is very, very popular. I wonder if it will be as much so in 100 years. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, my wife, she owns a dance studio. She teaches little kids how to dance. So I'm at that point in life, if I hear one more of these Frozen songs being played, because that's what all the little kids want to dance to and stuff. I'm 45.
My little granddaughter likes to sing it. She loves it.
Oh yeah, it's very popular. So, if I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like a lot of these folklore stories are stories that kind of came about almost out of necessity, where people needed a way to pass information that would help the next generation. Or am I misunderstanding you there a little bit?
Absolutely. Many of them are teaching stories. For example, the folktale of Hansel and Gretel, about the two little children whose parents, the evil stepmother, doesn't want to keep them because they eat too much, and so they're left in the woods, and the witch finds them and threatens to eat them, and Gretel, with her cleverness, manages to figure out a way to get the witch into the oven and save her brother. It's a warning story for children to be careful.
Not eat too much.
And so many stories are similar for warning, stories about Bigfoot or stories about swamp monsters.
Right.
Be careful. Don't leave home. Mind your parents. Don't get into wild territory. You may be in a very dangerous place.
So, when I think about that, I think, on one hand, like, why couldn't the parent just say, hey, this, like, be careful in the woods? Like, why do they need the story? And in my head, I'm thinking, I'm willing to bet that these stories probably make it easier for people to remember, these lessons, and they
really scare the kids. For example, there's a Native American Haudenosaunee story that's told by the Seneca people about a giant named High Hat who roams the forest late at night. And if he finds little children, he's going to take them and eat them with his extremely sharp teeth. And so just imagine the difference between having your father say, well, don't go out in the woods now, and someone saying, you better watch it, or this enormous giant is going to crunch you up with his sharp teeth.
Now, is that similar to the Wendigo? Are you familiar with the Wendigo?
Yeah, it's not exactly the same, but it's similar, because the Wendigo is a starved monster who is howling also out in the wilderness and looking for human flesh. He's a cannibal ogre like High Hat. But he has a little bit different symbolism. He's more associated with isolation, loneliness, the danger of being far away from society, and
at one point,
kindness.
At one point, I almost got a Wendigo tattoo. I don't even know why. I was like 20 something years old, and I was like, that thing looks badass. I think I should get a tattoo of that. And then I realized what it meant. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the thing I want to put on my body.
You might not want to be like that
guy. Well, the last couple that you mentioned were, kind of Native American folklore, right? And you being up in New York, I'm sure that you guys have tons of folklore up there that are probably, a lot of it's actually inspired by the Native Americans in your area.
Yeah.
So
here we have many on the State University of New York campuses, for example. There are many buildings with Native American names. And there's the whole heritage of the Native people. Sadly, we don't have very many Native American students at my university right now, but I know the administration is working hard to try to change that.
Well, for the Native Americans specifically, and I am not a Native American, I don't want to speak on their behalf, but it does seem like, these type of stories are maybe even more important to their culture than, somebody from Europe, like European descent. I know that the Europeans brought, their stories over and stuff, but, I and maybe I'm wrong, but like Europeans typically didn't live like abiding by these that much, right? And then the Native Americans are more like, these stories are part of their day-to-day life. Am I making any sense, or is that even right? Like,
no, it's an interesting thing to think about. I find it a little bit difficult to talk about all Native Americans and all Europeans, but I know for many Native people, telling the stories is a very important part of their culture that they work consciously to pass on to their young people. I just went to a Haudenosaunee festival 2 weekends ago, and there was dancing, storytelling for kids, which was fantastic, with a man wearing the traditional headdress and garments who was speaking in wonderful dramatic tones to the children about the creation of the earth and some of the lives of the animals. And it's very important to teach those stories to the children so they'll understand their heritage. Of course, Europeans have such diverse heritage from so many different countries.
That's true.
There's a lot of variation there.
You know, I have only been to, you know, so growing up, I had a friend, and his family he always said that they were Iroquois. I don't know, and I have no reason to doubt him or whatever. But, you know, I never really understood, you know, what the big deal was, because they would always be very proud of this. And keep in mind, I'm like a 13-year-old, 14-year-old dumb kid, you know, and he would always talk about, you know, how important, you know, his heritage and his tradition was to him. And, you know, I never got it until, you know, a couple of years later. I want to say maybe I was 16, at least 16, because I remember I drove. They had one of these festivals where, you know, it was the Native Americans that lived in the area, and, you know, there was not a whole lot of them anymore, but they all got together and they performed, you know, the dances in the traditional dress, and they were, you know, doing the instruments. And I know I'm not getting this totally right, you know, but I don't mean disrespect to anybody, but I just remember at the time, like, holy crap, like there is something about this. Like when he talks about, you know, the tradition and passing down the stories, I never got it. You know, I'm just a dumb white kid who was never exposed to that. But the first time I went to one of those festivals, it kind of hit home a little bit. And I would like to think maybe that had an impact on my life, you know, and why I care so much about this stuff now.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I think it's very impactful to see that kind of storytelling in action. And besides storytelling, it's serving of food and creation of traditional clothes and photographs. I bought a beautiful photograph at the festival. It's so much. It's exciting to see how vibrant the culture is.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, for me, I think I left just feeling like this. I mean, they weren't my family, but you felt like family. Whatever was going on definitely made you feel invited, and like you felt like you were part of something bigger than yourself. Yes. You know, even if that's not my heritage and those aren't my traditions, you kind of feel like you're a part of a bigger family, you know, when you leave one of those events. And that I just remember that was the feeling that stuck with me a lot.
That's really nice to hear.
Yeah. And then I decided to go buy books and try to learn as much as I could, but you know, that's a different thing. So, you know, when in regards to your area of New York and maybe the Native American folklore, what are some of your, like, what's your favorite folklore story about them? Not about them, of them. You know what I mean?
Of the Haudenosaunee people?
Yeah.
Or of...
Yeah. Do you have a favorite story that is told, or one that really resonates with you?
Oh, well, I'd say my favorite story is the creation of the world on Turtle's Back. Want me to summarize? It's about Sky Woman who is up in the sky world, and she wants to go down, and she finds a hole in the floor, and she opens up the floor and goes down, and she's falling and falling, and some of the eagle and some of the other birds help to cushion her fall so she won't fall too hard. And then she finally lands upon the water down there, and some of the animals decide that they need to help her make a new world, and so they try to find some earth to bring up to make a new world. And Turtle, she's on Turtle's back, and Turtle tries to bring, in some of the versions it's Turtle who brings up some earth, and in some of the other versions up more toward the northern Midwest, it's the muskrat who brings up the first dirt. Then they create Turtle Island, the world on Turtle's back. And so that is the origin of our world.
So obviously, I mean, that sounds a lot like religion, right? Like, you know, so
It's just a different form of religion.
yeah, I was gonna say, is there a difference between, you know, these folk story? I don't know if folk story is the right word, or folklore in this instance, and religion. It seems like maybe those are more aligned than you might think at first. Maybe.
I agree. They're sacred stories. They're stories about the origin of the earth.
Right. Now, do people, you know, are people still practicing in that manner today? As in like people, you know, pass these stories on? Are there people that, and I don't know how to say this without sounding rude. I don't mean it to be rude at all, but like take that seriously. Like, do people still, you know, whether it's the turtle or any of these other folklore, do people still take these stories seriously?
Or very much so. Yes.
And go ahead.
For example, my State University of New York colleague, Professor Robin Wall Kimmerer at SUNY Environmental Science and Forestry, wrote a wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which is all about, you've probably heard of it.
Yeah, I think I've heard of that book before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about learning to live respectably and responsibly on the earth. And it includes the story of the creation of the earth and many other stories about living responsibly and joyfully and respectfully with everyone else.
Well, I think those are lessons a lot of people could probably learn in today's world, where everybody just wants to fight and argue and all this other nonsense that surrounds us all the time.
Absolutely.
Well, you know, when we first started talking, you know, one of the things that I had said to you was that it seems like folklore and this tradition of passing down stories is dying. And you said, no, Tim, like, you know, maybe that isn't the case, and maybe it's kind of morphing into something new. So what were you hinting at? What are you suggesting is actually happening?
I think we're in a constant state of flux with folk traditions. And sometimes I have thought that certain traditions, stories and other traditions are dying out. But in just about every case, I've been proven wrong. In folklore, there's a term for that. It's called the devillusionary premise in folklore, the idea that traditions are always on their way out. They're just fading. But usually you find that they may be changing form, but they're usually just morphing. As long as people need that kind of tradition, they're going to find a different way to express it.
Can you give me an example of one that you've kind of seen that happen with?
Sure. Well, with some of the stories that children told very often back in the 1970s, some of the oral stories that they shared with each other on playgrounds, like there's one Rawhead and Bloody Bones and another one called Bloody Fingers.
Okay.
About
I don't
monsters.
know any of this.
You probably haven't heard of it because they're not really that common anymore. But it's where there's a ghostly sound or something like that. And every member of the family goes out and tries to deal with the ghost. And the only one who can deal with it is the baby. And the baby comes up with his bottle and says to Bloody Fingers, "Oh, go get yourself a Band-Aid." And so you don't hear kids telling those stories anymore. They don't go out on the playground and teach these stories to each other. So in a way, that's kind of too bad, because they're not doing this oral storytelling, which is really good for their developing brains. But on the other hand, if you look at some of these videos that they watch and educational shows, you see that there are many, many shows about small children, such as Dino Dana, for example. I don't know if you've come across her.
No, I have
on
not.
TV, who is a worldwide sensation, this little girl who somehow brings dinosaurs to life. And she's very small and doesn't seem likely to be able to handle things like this. But she's the boss. She's great at it all. And so that kind of story continues. It's just in audiovisual form now, instead of children telling those stories to each other.
Well, I do know that some kids and even maybe some adults still bring up some of these folklore, you know, superstitions, tradition, especially as we're heading into the Halloween season. You know, where Halloween is 5 weeks away, roughly. And I know a lot of these are kind of brought out of the woodwork, you know, around Halloween. I mean, some of them that I think of are like Bloody Mary, right? Like, is that what's that other one, Paul? Light as a feather. That's what he was saying. The light as a feather thing. Are these the same kind of things that, because people around Halloween do these kind of things, you know, they get together.
I'm glad you brought those up. I've written articles about both Bloody Mary and Light as a Feather. I think Light as a Feather is really interesting because it was first documented in the Diary of Samuel Pepys in London during the time of the Great Plague in London in the 1600s. And he observed some little girls chanting to each other and raising a figure, pretending it was coming back from the dead. And that's the same kind of ritual that girls are doing today.
Right. Yeah. So some of those things just never die. And, maybe they're not being kept around for the original purpose. Like, I don't think these kids are getting together on Halloween and doing that, based on the original folklore. They just think it's spooky,
I think that's why little girls have always done it, and boys too. It's not only girls. It's exciting. It's pushing back the boundaries of what is possible between the natural and the supernatural, and just seeing what I tried it in 6th grade with a bunch of friends at a slumber party, and we weren't even able to lift the kid, but just the fact that we were trying it was so exciting.
Right.
We were thrilled, and many other people feel the same. Whether or not it works, you feel really powerful making that effort.
So the other, you said you actually wrote an article about the Bloody Mary thing. Mm-hmm. So if I understand that correctly, that's the one where you say Bloody Mary into a mirror 3 times and she's supposed to appear or something like that?
It can be different numbers of times, 3 or 5 or 12, 7. Yes. And this is a ritual that's known all around the world by different names. In Sweden, for example, it's called Black Madame, and you chant her name into a mirror. And she's supposed to, the girls I worked with when I did my doctoral dissertation called her Mary Wolf. And they thought it was a wolf woman who would appear in a mirror and scratch your eyes out. And so I asked them, why do you want this woman to come scratch your eyes out? And they just said, it would be fun. It would be great. They didn't really want to be scratched, but it just has huge appeal, and it shows no signs whatsoever of dying out.
Well, where do you think that, and you probably know, like, where did that story originate? What is that based off of? Who is this Black Madame or Bloody Mary, or how did this whole thing even get started?
It's a little hard to know exactly when it originated, but I think that, as best I can tell, it originated in medieval beliefs that if you stared at a mirror too long, you would be tempting the devil to appear and scratch your face and punish you for being vain. So I think it's from medieval Christian culture. But mirrors have a lot of folk tradition associated with them. And I think people find them exciting.
Yeah, we were watching I don't remember if it was a TV show or a movie, but it was something about a black mirror. And somehow,
Black Mirror is great. Uh-huh.
Well, is it the show or the actual physical object?
Well, the show's named Black Mirror.
Right.
But there are black mirrors all around, including these gizmos we call cell phones.
Dun, dun, dun. Yep.
They look like black mirrors in a way. They reflect. They're dark, and it's just this endless fascination with what can come out of a mirror. It's probably going to be more than your own reflection. It's a very deep folk belief. So,
I mean, I get the connection with the vanity thing, because, that's part of, or at least, older Christianity beliefs, at least the way I understand it, don't be vain, right? Like, I remember growing up in Pennsylvania, we lived among the Amish, and that was a big thing for them. You can't, no, I don't even think they had mirrors, if I remember correctly, because it was such a sin to be vain. But I'm going to guess it's probably not as much of a sin to be vain nowadays, especially with, the world that we have going on today, or at least people don't look at it the same way. So why would our fascination with mirrors continue?
Well, I think people like to look at their own faces.
Not
it's
this
fun
guy.
To look at your own face, and appearance is very important. And there are just so many stories and films about what happens when you look into a mirror. And that, people, especially young people, they want to know. And around Halloween, that's a time when people especially think about magic that might happen connected with mirrors.
I don't know. I look into a mirror and the only thing I think of is you are disgusting and you need to lose weight, Tim.
Oh, you look fine.
Thank you. Well, around Halloween, especially, I mean, since this episode will come out before Halloween, like, are there any, I know there is. I mean, the whole idea of Halloween, kind of started as like a folklore type thing, right? Like the idea of people gathering before winter to, make sure everything was kind of good to go. right? Like,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that's when they came together, shared food, shared stories, all this stuff. But
In Britain, in Celtic culture.
But we don't do that so much anymore. I mean, we're not really preparing for the winter, but Halloween, I guess, is still a time to gather with your family, sort of. Maybe not as much as Thanksgiving or Christmas. So why do you think a lot of these beliefs, the Halloween type folklore and stories and traditions, why do you think that they continue into modern day?
Well, that's another really good question. I think a number of reasons why. One is that in many parts of the world, there's the changing of the seasons. And as it's getting colder and darker, you're aware, even if you do have enough food and don't depend quite so much on a family farm, still you're aware that it's getting colder and darker and feels in a way more threatening. And maybe there's a need to have a ritual to mark that transition. But also, on Halloween, children love dressing up as all different sorts of figures, including scary figures, monsters, ghosts, Dracula.
And now most adults
think they're scared of, or adult figures, celebrities.
Yeah. Last time I dressed up, I think I was 12 years old. I dressed up as a clown, and my dad yelled at me. And so I've never, I don't know, I think it's maybe some childhood scar I'm carrying. So I've never dressed up again after that. He didn't
want you to be a clown? That's too bad.
No, I think I just did a really bad job on the makeup or something. I just remember like, you look ridiculous. And I'm not judging them. I've got frustrated with my kids from time to time, but I remember that. I'm like, oh my God, I'm never doing this again. And it stuck, working at a ghost tour company. There's a lot of people that love dressing up for Halloween. We kind of attract those people. One year I put a fedora on, and we had a fedora laying around. I put it on and told everyone I was a gangster. That's the extent of my Halloween dress up anymore.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think adults love to dress up too. There are a lot of adult costume parties. People get dressed up and have fun, and they just act wild for a while. And it's nice. It's nice to be somebody else for a little while and to have a festival. It's like Mardi Gras in a more limited way. And it gives you a chance to just take a look at some things that might be scary, monster figures and figures that represent things we worry about.
Well, you bring up, the monsters and all these things that are associated with Halloween. And even though they're more of like an entertainment thing for us today, they weren't always entertainment. Like these were actual real things that could, do damage to you or your family or whatever, right?
Oh yeah. And I think people dream about monsters. During COVID, I talked with many people who had horrible dreams of monsters. If you have sleep paralysis, you may dream of a monster on your chest. That happens all the way around the world.
So, it must be much more deep rooted into the human psyche than just some surface level sharing of stories, passing them down generations.
Yes, it is. And it's hard to trace some of that back to pre-literate times because we don't have written records. But I think if we imagine what it was like to be an early human with saber-toothed tigers and other beasts around, there were things to worry about.
Yeah, I was going to say, a lot of that stuff that, it's kind of like remnants of, us thousands of years ago. We were just talking about this the other day with, we were talking about psychics. And how I said, most psychics I've met in my life, I think, are BS. But, I do believe that it's possible that people, every once in a while, there is a legitimate person who is psychic. And maybe that was some kind of remnant thing that we had back then that evolution kind of decided along the way. You don't need that anymore. But every once in a while, somebody still has it, just like every once in a while, somebody's still born with a tail. And, when, like you said, the monsters in the dreams being a worldwide thing, that would have to go back awful far, if that was some kind of remnant from, a learned human experience that is implanted and then passed down, even not orally. So that would have had to go back, Australopithecus afarensis times or something. So it's very fascinating.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And we have the archaeological records, we have bones, but it's hard to know a lot of, they have some information about rituals that early people had, but there's a lot that isn't known.
Yeah. I mean, it was all designed to keep us alive, right? So, now those monsters in your dream, I mean, in a way you should be grateful for them then, because if your very distant ancestors didn't have those experiences that cause that to be implanted in your subconscious, you might not be here today. So
that is a wonderful point. I agree. Yeah. My friend David Puglia wrote a book called North American Monsters, which has a really good set of chapters about different monsters in this country.
Is that the one where it's like every state is a different book?
Not every state, but quite a few of them. I have a chapter about a monster on our college campus.
Uh-oh. Well,
it's funny, though. It's a humorous monster. The Lake Lieberman monster.
We used to make
really dangerous.
Yeah, I think ghost tour companies are really good at making up those kind of monsters too. I've heard some ridiculous ones. Not saying that one's ridiculous, of course, but
well, it's not ridiculous. It's meaningful, but that's also an example of a monster that really flourished for a while back in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, and then kind of died out because the drinking age changed and campus culture wasn't the same, and they didn't need that monster anymore.
Oh, darn.
But there are other things.
Yeah. Well, I brought up, the ghost tour thing again. So is there a difference between ghost stories and folklore? Like, because folklore, there are some ghost stories that are based on real, verifiable people and events and stuff like that. But then again, there's also a lot of ghost stories that get passed down that more in story form than, I don't know how to say this right. It's like they're more based in reality than some of these other folklores that, just sound very fantastical. Are these all ultimately the same thing, or do they serve different purposes? Folklore compared to what we think of as ghost stories today, or are they all just kind of the same thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say that ghost stories are a subcategory of folklore, and that many meaningful stories have a kernel of truth, even if they sound fantastic and hard to believe. But there's usually something that has happened or very likely could happen that make the story especially meaningful.
Yeah, we obviously deal with a lot of ghost stories. And, one of the things that we take a lot of pride in, not that I'm trying to give us a pat on the back, is that, we tried to keep the stories as pure as we can, so to say, whatever the stories were, we want them to be that way. There's a lot of companies that'll just make up whatever sells tickets, right? Come hear this story, go to this location where this thing happened. And, a lot of times what they're doing is they're taking real folklore that I think is important to preserve kind of as is. And then they'll throw in all these other details, like I said, about the zombies eating the babies in the graveyard and stuff like that. And I think it's a real shame that kind of behavior happens. There's another type of folklore that I really wanted to ask you about as well, which are witches. And, we're coming up on Halloween, and, one of our most popular cities is Salem. Go figure. A lot of people want to go to Salem for Halloween. And, even though I'm pretty certain that the people that were persecuted in the 1600s were not legitimate witches, what can you tell us about witches and how they fit in to our modern folklore? How what witches are, how has that changed over the past couple of years or a couple hundred years?
Sure. Yeah. Well, there have been big changes in perception of witches. The tragedy of what happened in 1692 in Salem with the execution of so many accused people came out of the medieval stereotype of the witch as someone dangerous who would kill children and cause crop damage and kill animals and do all sorts of malicious things. It appears that stereotype came partly because some women were working as healers and people feared they had power that they might use in a way that was not safe. These days, people recognize Wicca as a form of religion. Some people identify as Wiccans, and that's nothing like that medieval idea of witchcraft. It's more a religious form that venerates the earth and respects people and practices rituals to respect the earth and to recognize the changing of the solstices and seasons during the year and try to do good things.
Well, how do you think that the concept of the witch has become so ingrained in society? The witch's hat almost has just become almost along with the pumpkin, the symbol of Halloween. This isn't just like a normal, trope, I guess you could say, from history. This is, witches kind of up there. How do you think that they became so notorious, infamous, famous? like respected? Like, how did they elevate to that level, or this idea of a witch or real witches?
Yeah, I wish I knew exactly how that happened. I do know that the kind of witch who can inflict damage is thought to be a very powerful, very dangerous figure, like the witch in Hansel and Gretel. And that is kind of fascinating to people. I think the idea that there can be someone who has that kind of power that you'd better watch out for. Um, would not be interesting to dress up as a Wiccan who is doing a nature-oriented ritual. That's not sensational at all, but it is religious. Yeah.
Now, do you think a lot of it, when the other thing that I've always been intrigued of when it comes to witches is when most people think of witches, it's almost always women. Like the first thought in their head is a woman. How did women specifically, or why were women maybe even targeted with the idea of you are a witch? Let's go back to the 1600s again. In that period, why did it seem to be that type of energy, or that kind of, really back then, I guess it was an accusation, was mostly at women?
Well, the witchcraft scholar Russell Hope Robbins believed that it was because of economic power, that there were women who owned land and who had wealth, and the church at that time wanted to take that power and accuse them of witchcraft and remove their material resources. And of course, there also were men with power. So why was that power not taken away more from men? There have been, very different perceptions of the genders over the years, and it does seem to have been an accusation leveled much more often at women. And even now, I think people tend to think of witches as more likely to be female than male. Though there are many men who identify as witches in reality.
Actually, I know today I know more men that identify as witches than women, but for the general public that doesn't own a ghost tour company and associate with people that are of that belief, they almost always imagine a woman. And, there's a part of me also that just, the first thought in my mind was, well, they were afraid of, like you said, women with power. They we all know how women were thought of, for long periods of time, and God forbid one of them would actually have any power, have any say, or maybe even have a thought. It's you stay in your place kind of thing. Therefore, if you step outside those bounds, you're a witch. I don't know. Like, imagine.
It's complicated. It does vary a lot from one area to another, so I wouldn't want to generalize too much, but I agree with you. It's just really interesting to see that it's that female witch figure that captures people's imagination. In The Wizard of Oz, for example, Margaret Hamilton plays the Wicked Witch of the West, and little girl, you'll never get home. And, she's scary. She is a very frightening figure. I think she reinforced the witch figure of Halloween quite a bit in that movie.
I read an article, and it was just an article. It wasn't, a peer-reviewed, or anything official, but it made me think for a second. Essentially, what the guy who wrote this article about witches and their association with always being perceived as women, his idea was men secretly wanted to be dominated by women, and therefore, he kind of made a good case for a little bit, because I can see it every now and then. Like every once in a while, and not in a funny way or anything, but like I like when my wife takes charge and gets things done. It's like, all right, maybe I think what he was doing was trying to blame shift, like from men doing it for nefarious reasons or evil reasons, to like, oh no, they just really enjoyed, the idea of a powerful woman around telling them what to do. And like that fear of that powerful woman, he actually said it was erotic for some men. And I'm like, that might.
I have occasionally heard of such things. Yes. But also maybe it's a little bit wanting to go back and have mommy be in charge. Like when you were a small child, maybe there's.
It all goes back to childhood, everything. My therapist says it all the time. But, why do you think that the legend of the witch is still powerful today? I think that, I do understand that some people consider themselves witches, and therefore I will call them a witch. But the concept of, a witch from 300 years ago is probably not the one that people are trying to be today, or are they? Because I don't think there's right.
I don't know a single person who's anything like that negative stereotype of witchcraft.
Yeah. So why do you think that that still persists to the degree that it is? Because even though there are some people that, like you said, the Wicca community, which I actually know some of them, they're actually very normal people. And actually to me, they're sometimes better than the non-Wiccans. This idea of caring about the earth. I'm one of the people that very much care about the earth and all this stuff. But despite all that, there's still this want, ingrained behavior that we can't get over, that witches are all evil. Like that came from somewhere. And it has a powerful grip on our psyche today. So
it's interesting, isn't it? Look, people are fascinated with evil. I think sometimes people are looking for someone to blame because there are always problems in the world.
That's why I got Paul. I blame everything on Paul. Can't see him.
Blame it all on the Wicked Witch of the West.
Yeah, that's right.
I think sometimes people feel that if there's just someone or something that they can blame for a difficult situation, that can help make them feel better.
Yeah. Paul's over there shaking his head like, yep, he knows what I'm talking about, but not really. Well, I do think that the work, not that my opinion on this matters that much, but I do think the kind of work that you're doing is really important. The idea of helping to, keep making sense of all this and keep sharing the information. And I think more importantly, in my opinion, is just getting that next generation to be excited about, folklore and this tradition, because I do understand what you said when you said that it's not that it's dying, Tim, it's just kind of changing. There is a part of me, it's like, I hope these things aren't lost forever, because they are so important to who we are as human beings. Everybody today, not everybody, you've already noticed I just overgeneralize everything. So not literally everybody, but, everybody's so, centered on themselves and, like what's happening in their life. And unless it's impacting their life at that moment, especially with, cell phones and computers and all this stuff, it's just, sometimes I feel like we're losing touch with what it means to actually be a human being, and that tradition of storytelling and passing these lessons down from generation to generation, I think is super important. And, I do worry sometimes that, we've lost some of it or we'll lose a lot more. And I really hope that we don't.
It's wonderful to hear that you care so much about perpetuating storytelling. And so do I. I care very much about it. I think there are many different ways that we can keep it alive, but people want to tell stories, and stories are important to the human kind.
I mean, I actually, and I'm not being biased. I don't think I'm being biased because I have a whole company that's revolved around storytelling, but that's one of the most important traits of being a person, in my opinion, is the idea of, because storytelling, I mean, in a way, if it wasn't for this idea of humans being storytellers, there is a possibility that at some point, in the past, that human beings might have went extinct. There's a lot of, I don't want to say evidence, but there's a lot of suggestions coming out that even in prehistoric times that, they were storytellers. They had their own primitive language, and whether it was, gathering around the fire with, the buffalo or whatever, as they always put them in the magazine as, it was the tradition of telling these stories and exchanging information that helped keep people together and keep them safe in groups. Absolutely. And, maybe we need a little bit more of that today, gathering around.
We do a certain amount of that with our text messages and our other ways of their social messaging, but doing it as person to person is pretty nice too.
No, I think that's why, like as I've got older, I have a deeper appreciation for this stuff. And this is why, when I was a kid or even as a young adult, holidays didn't really mean a lot to me. I mean, they were like, oh, it's Christmas, cool. What am I getting my kids or what am, and Thanksgiving was always a pain for me. Like, it was like, oh God, do I have to go listen to grandma and grandpa's, stories again and stuff, like that teenage kid behavior. But now I'm 45 and I really miss that. I really miss being able to gather around with my family and just share stories. What did you do in the past, 2 months since we've seen you? And, and inevitably they would bring up some story from their childhood and you would learn that and you kind of adopt that as your own story with your own self. And now that I'm, I'm not like that old, but, 45, I'm getting up there. And, now I'm getting to the point where, my kids are kind of taking my stories about my life and using them not as their own in a fake way, but adopting them and changing a little bit here, changing a little bit there. And, yeah, it actually kind of makes me sad a little bit. I was really close to my grandparents. So I miss those times hearing about them growing up in Alabama or Pennsylvania or wherever.
Well, it's exciting to hear that your children are telling stories they've learned from you. And, you can write down and preserve what you know about your grandparents, save it for your kids. If you want to.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, they were really important to me, all of them.
Good.
But yeah, I really hope that this idea of, not an idea, but folklore and traditional storytelling and all this stuff. I would love to see it come back in like a major way. I don't even know what that looks like. And I'm not implying that it's going away, but like, I would really love to see a resurgence of, people, appreciating these stories for what they are and wanting to embrace them and share them, because at the end of the day, it's what makes us human, in my opinion. That's
lovely. I agree. And that's what my courses are all about. I'm teaching Introduction to Folklore next semester. Looking forward to getting my students to record their family stories and share them with the class.
That's actually what I was going to ask you next, is we always try to keep these about an hour, and I always feel bad going over, because I know that you guys have lives as well. If people wanted to learn more about you or the courses that you teach, or, any of this stuff, where would they go to find that out?
Well, they could go to my webpage at Binghamton University, Elizabeth Tucker, and all of my books are on Amazon.com.
So every time somebody says they wrote a lot of books, I always have to ask, if somebody was only going to buy one of your books, which one would you recommend or want them to buy?
No, I would recommend Haunted Halls, Ghost Lore of American College Campuses, the kinds of ghost stories that college students tell. So I think they're fascinating, and they're very much alive, and they're always changing.
Yeah, that's a very specific kind of ghost story.
No, there's
college,
a lot of them.
And then the halls.
And they're teaching stories about how to be safe.
Really?
Have a good life and not end up like a ghost.
Well, I mean, they can teach some lessons as a ghost too. I'm familiar with a couple college ghost stories, but the ones that come to mind immediately are the ones at Gettysburg College. I grew up not far from Gettysburg, so that's kind of where before this whole ghost stuff started, I was a huge history buff, and I still am. I don't tell anybody this, but I actually enjoy the history way more than the ghosts. So I'd go to Gettysburg all the time. And I remember hearing the ghost stories of the Gettysburg College on Seminary Ridge.
I went on their ghost tour there once when I was there for a conference. It was terrific.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, like I said, I don't want to take up too much of your time, and maybe there's a chance for us to come back and
sure.
dive deep into this a little bit more. But
real pleasure to meet you. Thank you for interviewing me.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get this out, and hopefully we'll inspire the next generation. Actually, who am I to think one podcast is going to inspire a generation? But
or you can inspire the next generation.
Hey, at this point, if I can inspire one person, that's cool.
That's the spirit.
Like, definitely. You don't know, like this face I do when I talk about this stuff, it's not fake. I actually get the ghost tour company, like I know what most people's perception of ghost tour companies are, and I have fought so hard to try to change that narrative of the corny stuff, and it has not been easy. But this stuff is super important to me. I do think it's very important. So I thank people like you and you specifically for doing the work to try to preserve and protect and share, so that the next generation doesn't forget where all of this came from.
Thank you for what you're doing. I hope to go on one of your ghost tours sometime.
You're more than welcome to come anytime you want.
Thank you very much.
Just reach out. All right. Well, for now, I'm going to let you go, and it's been a pleasure having you. But until next time, thanks for joining.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
This episode was brought to you by Ghost City Tours, your guide to the haunted side of history in over 25 cities nationwide. From restless spirits to unsolved mysteries, our tours bring the dead back to life. Book now for a haunted city near you at ghostcitytours.com.